Hello, everybody. It's Mrs. Pond. We're starting a new chapter, chapter 2.3 on fungi from Purposeful Design Life Science. Section we're going to talk about today is section 2.3.1 on the structure of fungi. So, our objectives today will be to list several characteristics of fungi and explain how multicellular fungi reproduce and how God designed fungi to help maintain environmental balance. Now, most fungi live on land, but some live in the ocean and many live within or on other organisms. And if I were to ask you about fungi, what would you say about them? Like, what kind of examples would you come up with? Would you conclude that they're good or bad? Or what would you say about them? For example, would you come up with perhaps something like athlete's foot that's a disease caused by fungus? Um, would you talk about the mold that's the black mold that is growing in the bathroom and is not good to breathe in? Or um, would you talk about mushrooms on your pizza or the fact that we use yeast to make bread? As we can see, it's really a bit more complex than saying something is good or bad. Because there's a lot of variety with fungi. When we talk about them. Now, many fungi are saprophytes. That means they live off dead or decaying materials. And so that dead or decaying material could be bread that's been left out on the counter, or it could be in the forest where they are very beneficial out in the ecosystem because if we did not have saprophytes, there would just be dead stuff laying all over the place and materials would not be recycled on Earth. Now, some fungi, like yeast, are unicellular, but most are multicellular, and most of them that we're most familiar with. And these multicellular fungi contain hyphae. These are the thread-like filaments in fungi that produce enzymes to break down living or dead organisms. So on this log, there is a mushroom growing. The hyphae are actually sticking out here, these white things sticking out. Actually, as far as this fungus is concerned, the mushroom is a fruiting body. It's just part of the fungus. The hyphae are probably throughout this whole log that the fungus is breaking down. And what it is doing is from these hyphae, it is sending out enzymes to digest the log and sending the nutrients throughout the whole fungus. It is absorbing them. So the interesting thing about fungus is that it actually digests its food outside of itself and then absorbs the food, which is the exact opposite of what we do. We digest food inside of us and then absorb the food. So they digest it outside of them. And another cool thing about these hyphae is that unlike plants, where there would be many cells next to each other with cell walls in between, a hyphae actually is very long and thread-like and contains multiple nuclei. Now, they might have little partitions in between them to spread things out a bit and divide them up, but it's very free flowing as far as nutrients and everything, which is very important for the fungus because unlike plants, they don't have a vascular system. They don't have special structures to transport water and other materials through the fungus. So by just having these partitions and no real clear division between the areas between the nuclei, they're able to transport materials very quickly throughout the whole fungus. So fungi digest their food with enzymes produced by hyphae before the food is absorbed. Now, mycelium is the large mass of hyphae that forms the growing structure of fungi. That does not just, it's not just the fruiting body that we call here. And we'll talk about fruiting bodies in a minute. It's not just the mushroom, it's the whole structure that we don't see because mushrooms we'll just see for part of a year when the fungus is reproducing. But underneath, inside the log, that is absolutely filled with the fungus, and that will be there all year long. and that's the mycelium. Now, spores, these are a small reproductive cell that can develop into an adult without fusing with another cell. So, this is how mushrooms reproduce. They reproduce with spores. And I have puffballs here because I don't know if you've ever been walking along and seen a puffball and stomped on it and watched all the spores just spray all over the place. And now, those spores are contained in the fruiting body. This is a structure on a fungus where spores are produced. So, this part on the outside is the fruiting body. The fruiting body of a mushroom would be the mushroom cap. And that's the part that we usually associate with fungus and we identify with the most is the fruiting body. And when we talk about mushrooms, we're talking about the fruiting body, the reproductive structure of the fungus. And fungus spores can grow into hyphae under the right conditions. Well, what are those right conditions? Fungi usually grow well in moist, warm conditions. That's why we see them oftentimes in the forest because it's just wetter, moister, damper there. And one fruiting body can produce trillions of spores. So that's a lot of spores. And a balance is maintained in nature, even though fungi produce so many spores, because fungi can only grow to maturity when temperature, moisture, food, and space are right. So those spores will go everywhere, but God created the spores so that they have to have just the right conditions. And they're not going to land um, where they're going to have all those conditions met all the time. And so the fungus has to produce a lot of spores so that some of them will land in the right spot where they can grow. So our objectives were to list several characteristics of fungi and explain how multicellular fungi reproduce and how God designed fungi to help maintain environmental balance. So don't forget to keep watching to answer the questions at the end and remember your 5 questions in the margin.